Hello everyone and welcome to our Wednesday discussion in Module 3. Today I'll be talking about APA and basically providing some kind of high-level guidance and suggestions based upon what I've learned over the years and things that have worked for me and things that have resulted in a marked improvement in my students whenever I've shared this. This is suggestions, guidance, but it's up to you to decide what you want to do with this information. And if in doubt, anything I say it seems to be contradictory to what you believe to be the case in APA, let me know. Point me to the place in the manual that you're talking about and position your argument, and I'd be glad to hear it. So anyway, jumping straight in. Where do you want to start, right? So you start off by going to the Rasmussen University's APA resources, and in particular, you want to pay attention to that template. Because one of the things, and we'll talk about this more, and I say it several times, templates are your friend. So you want to be using this template. The word template will help you write appropriately, and we'll talk about it in a moment of what it looks like, but it is the student version of the APA 7th template, and that's what you should be using. There is a professional version intended for graduate students. It's up to the universities to decide which is appropriate. Some organizations feel that anything post-graduates or anything after undergraduate work should be considered professional. Rasmussen has chosen to go with the student version, a reasonable choice either way. So the URL is there on the screen. Do take a look at it. So what does APA look like, and why you want to use a template? So the short version, this is roughly what the title page of an APA paper looks like. Not the most riveting thing you've ever seen, certainly not pretty by any stretch, but is functional, and this is what it should look like. Notice up here, upper left-hand corner, there's no running head. Back in APA 6 and in the APA 7th Professional, there is a header up here that is an all uppercase version of the title of the paper. It's no longer present. It's not present in the student version of this template. Also, you have the page number upper right-hand corner on every page. The title of the paper is centered, bold, and down just a little bit, roughly here, a space between it and then your name, the university that you're affiliated with, the course number, colon, and then the title, your professor's name, and then the date that the assignment is due. One of the benefits of having it in this format is it makes it easier if it's in like plagiarism detection software, so that we can see exactly where something came from if there's a question. So that's what a title page looks like. And you'll want to follow that in all of your assignments that are asking for pretty much written submissions. So the first page of content, you repeat the title on the top of the page. You'll notice the page number is upper right hand corner. There's no header up here. The title should match exactly what's on the title page. It's also bold, centered, and then a carriage return, so basically just a single, no additional spaces, but it is all double spaced. And then you start with the introductory paragraph. Notice that there is special indentation here, so on each line, the first line of each paragraph is indented 1/2 inch. Margins are set to 1/2 inch all the way around. And no full justification. Everything is left justified. And that is basically what an APA paper looks like at a high level. Also, the references page, that is typically speaking, the last page. References goes on its on page, so you want a page break before this. Page number again, that should happen automatically with your template. And then you have a jagged or hanging indentation here with the author's name and so on. Particular formats dependent upon what type of thing it is that you're citing. So that's the rough outline of what APA looks like. That's not to make you think that that's all APA is about. It's not just how it looks. APA speaks to a much broader set of topics, including tone, the way things are said, the type of language that's used, the references to numbers and statistical methods and so on. There's an entire set of things that goes into it. This is kind of just a brief introduction to some very high level and important things to go over. Another piece that you may see sometimes in APA papers is an abstract. You'll see them in a lot of journal articles that you review as well, but generally speaking, you don't need to write one. If in doubt, ask your instructor, but most of the time, don't do it. Just say no. The reason being, abstracts are challenging. They're very challenging to write correctly. It's simply hard. It should be, if you do one, it should be a single paragraph with no indentation. It should outline concisely and the appropriate tense, the nature of the research, what the point was, what the thesis statement was, what the research problem was, the research methods, the findings, and takeaways, all of that in roughly 150 to 200 words. So it's very challenging to be that concise and that extensive and precise when doing the writing. So that's part of the reason why it's not necessarily applicable for this type of writing. Also, it's more applicable if you're publishing something rather than you're a student writing a paper. One of the things you'll see in writing is that there's a common pattern, and it's essentially a recursive pattern. And that pattern is something is introduced, it's talked about, and then there's a conclusion. So that pattern applies to several things, including the paper as a whole. Your paper has an introductory section. You should always have a section that introduces the topic. In APA 7, or APA in general, you don't use the word introduction as a heading. It's not necessary because we know the first paragraph after the introductory, or after the title, is considered to be the introduction. Generally speaking, there'll be a heading after that introduction that lets the reader know that they've moved on past the introduction into the actual heart of the paper. But that first paragraph, maybe the first two paragraphs, will be the introduction. But this concept of introduction, content, conclusion follows through not just at a paper level, because the paper, you would have your introduction, your body, and then a conclusion section where you restate the stuff that basically was in your introduction, including the thesis statement and subtopics, but more in a here's what I told you sort of way. But it also applies whenever you talk about a section within that paper. So something that has a heading. Generally speaking, the first paragraph within that section should tell the reader what the point of that section is. So what are we going to talk about here? You don't use that language, obviously, you stay much more formal, but that's essentially what you're doing is what's the point of this section? Why does it exist? And then you move on to the actual body of it, and then you move on to potentially even subsections. Then at the very end of it, you kind of wrap it all up with a paragraph at the end of that section that is essentially the conclusion for that section, and then it transitions to another section. If you drill in a little bit more, it applies to a paragraph. A paragraph has a topic sentence. That topic sentence outlines the point of that paragraph. So why does that paragraph exist? Then the next two or three sentences, how many ever there might be, are essentially the body of the paragraph or the content. And then you wrap it up with a sentence at the end that essentially links it together and moves on and prepares the reader for the next paragraph. And it's very much a recursive pattern. So if you think about when you're writing, one of the most important things that you can do when you start a paper is make sure you know what's the point of the paper. It's kind of obvious when I say it that way, but you'll be surprised how often you're left scratching your head of what was the point, right? Especially if the instructions were a bit vague. So to address that, the point of the paper is called the thesis statement. It is the reason that thesis is being written, the reason that paper is being written. It is pretty much a single sentence that says the point. Sometimes it has a context clue on the beginning of it that says this paper or this work addresses, or something that lets the reader know, hey, look here, this is the thesis statement. Subsequent to that thesis statement, you typically have a series of at least 2 or 3 subtopics that relate to that thesis statement that are going to be discussed to reinforce it and to support it. So you need both of those two things, a thesis statement that introduces the point, and without that thesis statement, it's hard to tell what the paper's about. It should say what the point is, what's the purpose of this paper, and then the subtopics support that thesis statement, and generally speaking, those subtopics turn into your heading level 1s. So that's just the typical pattern, and if you follow that pattern, your reader will thank you because it's easier for them to understand. You tell them in the beginning, the very first paragraph, you tell them, here's what I'm going to talk about, and here are the things you need to look for as you go through this. So you're giving them a roadmap to your paper. And then they go along and they get to a section and they say, it's equivalent of saying you are here on a map. So they're able to tell, this is where I'm at in the whole process. So those two things together, thesis statement and subtopics, are essential. You've got to get them right, and they have to occur in both the introduction, and generally speaking, they're going to also occur in the conclusion in a kind of past tense way. You're going to say, here's what the thesis statement was, not those words, but that's basically what you're doing. And then you're also saying, here's the things that I said that addressed that thesis statement and how that makes sense. So you always start with that thesis statement and topic and so on. And then you make sure that you capture all the parts of an assignment. It's amazing to me how many students, especially doctoral level students, miss sub parts of an assignment, things that are clearly delineated perhaps in a bulleted list of this is what you need to talk about and here's the specifics. Whenever you're making the transition from assignment to paper, you want to make sure you capture those, and if you need to, turn them into heading level 2s. So if there is 5 things that you need to talk about and each one of those have 3 things that are to be addressed, then make those the headings and subheadings inside of your paper, and make notes to yourself about what it is you need to talk about in each one of them. You can go through the process of creating a proper outline if you're so inclined, but what you're going to do is take that outline and turn it into or take that outline and turn it into the headings inside your paper anyway. So maybe just skip that bit and go straight to the headings in your paper. Make sure that if you have a heading level 2, there's more than one of them within a given heading level 1. So you don't have two sub-bullet, or you don't have one sub-bullet underneath of another sub-bullet. That's just not how we do that sort of thing. You should merge, in that situation, merge it together with the main body of the paper or that section, and then or add another section that it complements it or justifies its existence. The same reason there shouldn't have a situation where you have only one heading level 1. The only possible exception to that is if you don't have anything after the introductory paragraph, you ramble for a bit, and then maybe you're just making one point, and then you have a conclusion. So generally speaking, though, at least 2 heading level 1s in your paper, and if there's a heading level 2, there's at least 2 of them underneath of a given heading level 1, and so on. Always include an introduction section in your paper and also within your paragraph. That is, you don't use the word introduction as a heading, but it's the first thing after the title, and we know to look for it there. Always include a conclusion, wrap it up. Whatever it is you're writing, always wrap it up. It's like if you're on a phone call and you just hang up partway through, right? Do the niceties, say, hey, yep, it was great talking to you and hope everything works out well and I'll talk to you later. Don't just click, right? Because that's what it's like if you just stop writing as soon as you finish whatever the other things are. So wrap it up and let the reader have closure. Literally, that's what you're doing. You're concluding the conversation. If you make a claim, have a citation to support that claim. The only exception to that, if it's something that's pretty well known in the field and it's not something that's controversial and so on, but even then, how do you know that thing? So generally speaking, if you make a claim, make sure there's a citation to support it. When you do make a citation, cite it on the first use of a source in a given paragraph. Don't put it at the end of the paragraph. That's MLA or something else, but use it on the first sentence that you use that source. Don't repeat that citation within that same paragraph unless you introduce another source after it. So the point there is to make sure that it's clear who to attribute the ideas to. And rather than oversighting, which some people will do, where they cite every sentence in a paragraph with the same source, don't do that. Only cite it on the first one, and only cite it again if it's ambiguous as to who it might belong to. At the point you start another paragraph, you started another thought. If you use the same source in that second paragraph or subsequent paragraphs, you need to cite it again. But generally speaking, within a paragraph, for a given source, only one citation, unless you're alternating back and forth between sources, which is something you sometimes do. So let's take an example to make this a bit more tangible and real. So assume that you're given the assignment that you're to write 300 to 400 words discussing IT security policy implementations. Riveting, I know, but imagine that that's what your assignment is. You're also told to define the concepts and provide its major elements, and then talk about the importance and challenges, and including the challenges faced during implementation. So why does it matter, and what are the challenges that can occur? So here's the basic outline. Creating a proper bulleted outline, kind of overkill, but I went ahead and did it, right? And generally speaking, probably a good idea to go ahead and title case all those items. I did it without the fourth bullet there should be title case. This should be title cased. But we all make mistakes, but generally speaking, title case things. And then also you would probably start thinking about what is the name of this paper that I'm writing. So this is basically kind of the fill-in of the APA paper, the template with that sort of thing. I put a title in here. I called it Overview of Information Technology Security Implementation. I did not call it Module 1 assignment. So keep that in mind. Make sure that the title is descriptive, that is something that somebody can tell what it's about by reading the title. And maybe it's something you publish on a blog if you're so inclined. So later on, maybe you take your paper and put it out on a blog. And if you did, you wouldn't want the heading of that blog that people click on to find it to be, assignment 1 or something. Make it descriptive. Then you include your name, the university you're affiliated with, the course and the code and the title, your instructor's name, and then a date. Written out in a full form. Don't do it as 12/25/2020 or something. Write it out in the proper way. Full name of the month, then the day of the month, comma, the year. So that is basically what the title page would look like. One of the things to note is that most of the time, and it should be the case with all of the time, in your template, this is what you'll be seeing if you were to right-click, select all the text after the title page, right-click, except for the references page, and click on the properties of the paragraph. You should see that the first line is special, so under special, first line, and it's by 1/2 inch. That means that the first line of every paragraph should indent by 1/2 inch. Your margins are all basically 0 as far as indentation goes. Don't have it to where it's smaller yet because you can tell when you read it. The only reason people do that, I think, is because their word count's a little low, so they're trying to make the page count by reducing the space. It's obvious. Don't do it. The alignment should be left, not full justified, left justified, and spacing is always double spaced. And that's basically what all this is saying. And the first section of the paper is the introduction, and it should not have the introduction heading. I'll say that 20 times, and I'll probably still see something that has an introduction heading. So here's the title of the paper. This is the same as it is on the title page. I made notes in here that this is going to be where the introduction is going to be. Generally speaking, write that after I've written the rest of this stuff, and generally before I write the conclusion, although that can fluctuate. Sometimes I will go ahead and write the introduction and conclusion at the beginning as well, if I know exactly what I'm going to say and I don't think there's any chance I'm going to deviate. If there's a chance I'm going to deviate from these 3 subtopics, I'm probably not going to write that until the very end because I don't want to have to rewrite it and edit it to say, oh yeah, and this thing too, right? So generally speaking, I write the middle and then I do probably the end in the beginning, or vice versa, the beginning and then the end. But that's the general pattern. And I do these notes to let me know what's going on. And this is how heading level 1s look, centered. Always start with heading level 1s. If you have heading level 2s, they're going to be over here on the left side. They're going to be bold, but they're going to be left to the left, not centered. And that's basically the start of a paper. The next step is to go out and do some research. Generally speaking, you'll go to your university's library, do some research there. You may also want to utilize Google Scholar to do research. And there's a way to link it with your university library so that it can kind of know what you can get to from there. Generally speaking, one of the challenging parts of research is figuring out what those search terms are. And that's where these are examples of ones that I might try. I might also do something like write out information technology as well. And whenever you're searching, you want it to be sure, generally speaking, that it is published in the last 5 years, and also that it is a reputable paper from a peer-reviewed scholarly source. Once you've done that research, you'll go out and find some sources. You're going to read in a certain way. Generally speaking, we don't read a paper the whole way through. You generally start off with something like the abstract of the paper that you've found. Then you may skip back to the very end, take a look at the conclusion. Then you may skip up to the introduction. Then you may read over the methodology or the application. But generally speaking, one doesn't sit down and read a journal article from beginning to end, especially if you're doing a lot of research and reading a lot of them. The point is to kind of filter out the ones that matter sooner than later. You do that by evaluating them with a pretty harsh criteria or pretty stringent criteria early on. I generally consider things like, where is it published? What's the journal? Is it a journal I've heard of before? Or is it John's, generic scholarly source journal that started publishing this year? So if it's something that has long been published for quite a while, has a reputation, better yet you've heard of, then that's one of the reasons you might want to use it. What institution are the authors associated with? So there's a difference of where you work, at least in the perception of the work that you do. So if you're at a prestigious university that is a research-oriented university, your work is going to be considered probably more compelling than if you're at a community college. It's a harsh fact, but that's the reality. Not to say that there's not good research that's done in lots of different locations, but generally speaking, somebody that's from Berkeley or MIT or Caltech or CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, their work is likely going to be, regarded with a little more esteem than somebody at a local college. So that's just kind of the nature of things, but it's a subjective call. It's whatever you think about it. You'll also take a look for, is it well written? Are there typographical errors? Are there spelling mistakes? Is there formatting issues? And those are not so much a thing into themselves, but it's an indication of a lack of a peer review process, a lack of a formal sort of vetting by the publishing entity, and that it may have been rushed to print and may not have been, if there's a typo, it wasn't caught by the peer reviewer, it wasn't caught by the editor, and it wasn't caught by the original author. And there's actually going to be multiple peer reviewers, so multiple people didn't see it. So 4 or 5 people just didn't really catch something like a typo, tells you maybe move on. Is it pretty easy to find the point of the paper and the research and its findings? It's not a mystery or a scavenger hunt. It should be really easy to tell what's the point. If it's not easy to tell what the point is, move on. So that's kind of part of this process, is about filtering. Think of it like you're panning for gold. You're going to do pretty quickly. If you're not getting anything after 4 or 5 times, then you move on. It's that kind of concept. Moving on to the lowly paragraph. So why does that matter? So it does, and we'll talk about it in a moment, but basically think of paragraphs as being the bricks that make up this wall that is your paper. They are the units of kind of the units that go together. They should be pretty cohesive. They should fit together, and they should have something to do with each other. And the arrangement of them matters. So the first sentence of a paragraph is the main point of the paragraph. It should tell you what's the point. That's called the topic sentence. It may or may not have a citation on it, because the rule is you cite on the first time that you use a source. So if you use a source in the first sentence of your paragraph, you should probably put a citation on it. The other sort of argument is, well, your first sentence should be the topic sentence. It should explain the point of the paragraph. So why would there be a citation on it? And you, generally speaking, you want to introduce your evidence, which is going to require a citation after that initial sentence. My take on it is that if in that first sentence you make a claim that needs to be reinforced with a citation, you better have a citation on it. Don't just move it to the second sentence, because that's what people do. If it's something that's coming from a source, it should have a citation on it. And that's a pretty simple way of approaching it. You want to definitely think of that topic sentence as the introduction to the paragraph. It tells the reader what's the point of this paragraph. In theory, they should be able to read the first and last sentence of every paragraph and tell what you have to say. The middle stuff should be about making your argument and justifying the point that you make in that first sentence. The last sentence of the paragraph should be kind of wrapping things up and preparing the reader for the next paragraph. So in theory, you could skip the middle. Not everybody's that great of a writer, and that's another important thing to understand, that writing is a journey. You start off at one place and hopefully you get better. The way you get better is through feedback and continuing effort. If nobody ever tells you that something needs fixed, then you're not going to know to fix it. That's my role here, is to help you become a better writer along the way. And in the process, I will likely become a better writer just by having read other stuff and thinking about things that I might not think about otherwise. So why do you care about paragraphs at all? I mean, why do you talk so long about that, right? It's stupid, right? It's just stuff of a paper. And the heart of a paper is its paragraphs. They are made up of sentences. Obviously, sentences have citations on them, so that's really important. But it's about the mechanics of it and not just the art. There is an artistic element to it, a creativity that comes to play in it as well. But a lot of it is around following the rules of how this is how you do this. Sometimes, though, it's much easier to write 5 to 10 paragraphs than it is to write 1,000 words, because 5 to 10 paragraphs seems much more attainable. It's about abstraction. It's about units of work. It's about eating the elephant a bite at a time. So by writing a paragraph and getting a sense of completion and then moving on to the next paragraph, it will motivate you and build your writing confidence. And it's okay if you struggle. We all struggle at times, and there's times that we have to write something we know it's not good. Maybe we turn it in because we don't have time to do a better job, but that doesn't mean that you can't improve the next time something comes through. It's like everything else. You keep trying, you'll get better. There's some basic rules of sentences whenever we talk about the sentences that are making up these paragraphs. They should be very clear and precise. They should make it very clear as to who the actors are, what was done, when they were done, and so on. That's why we typically avoid things like it and they and this, because those are potentially ambiguous. And in fact, this could lead you to an unclear antecedent. That's going to be the error message you see if you're using Grammarly on the right side, because this needs to say what this is. So this is a problem doesn't really help. What is this? It could be lots of things. Or if we say this socioeconomic characteristic is problematic because of blah, 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 then you've identified what this thing is. Or this car is making a funny noise, not this makes a funny noise, right? When you're in the situation, you may be able to tell what that is, but lacking that context, you need to be explicit. That's kind of the whole point of scholarly writing, is to write in an explicit way. You don't use contractions. Instead, you write out the word. That is a formalism that goes with it. Is also, it removes any kind of ambiguity as well. And it frankly will help you with some of the grammatical issues in addition. And a sentence should, generally speaking, have a single thought. And a paragraph should have basically one idea. Paragraphs are linked together. They generally speaking have 3 to 5 sentences. Why 3 to 5? Well, 3 is the minimum, and it's because your first paragraph is your topic sentence. Your final, your first sentence is your topic sentence. Your final sentence is essentially wrapping everything up. And then if you have one sentence in between where you're presenting your evidence and making analysis, then you've got 3. You can, according to APA, have less than 3. You can have a paragraph with 1 sentence per the APA manual, but that's kind of discouraged. So do so only if you're really wanting to make a given point, a specific point, something powerful, very concise, very forceful. That's why you would do it. Generally speaking, you're going to have at least 1 citation per paragraph. There are exceptions. If that paragraph happens to be in your introduction, probably not, because unless you're making a claim, your introduction should not have any sources, because you're basically saying what's the point of what it is you're reading. Same thing is true of your conclusion. Generally speaking, no citations in your conclusion. Except for those 2 kind of edge cases, most things should have at least 1, maybe 2, or more citations in them. It depends on how many sources you're using to make your argument, essentially. And one of the things that may help is using what's called the meal plan. I didn't come up with this. It came from Duke. The idea here is that you use the acronym meal plan, being college students and Duke University, and something you can easily remember. That's probably where it came from. But the basic idea is that you have a main idea. That's the topic sentence. You present some evidence and you do some analysis, and then you lead out. The lead out's essentially the conclusion. You link it up together, stitch it up together, then move on to the next idea. So moving into the main idea, the main message of the paragraph, this is the topic sentence. It's not a mystery novel that you're writing. You're writing something very scholarly, so it should be very clear of what the point is. It should be really clear so that if somebody reads that sentence, the first sentence, they know what's going on. Generally speaking, there should be a single idea in a paragraph, not several, one idea. And if you find yourself with multiple ideas in the same paragraph, you probably have multiple paragraphs that you need to tease apart. Next is evidence and analysis. This is when you support any claims that you've made. You show how the information you're presenting supports your position. So what it is you're saying and why it's the case. It's not an opinion. It's saying, this is what the evidence says. This is how it relates to what I'm saying. You don't use those words, but that's basically what you're doing. Then you link it and lead out to the next element in the paper, be it the next section or the next paragraph in that same section you're in, or wrapping it up with the conclusion. And then you gently link the results and evidence and analysis, links the results of the analysis and evidence. So you're tying it together in a nice, casual sort of way or gentle way so that it shows they go together, and then you get the reader ready for the next paragraph. And it's a challenging process to do, make no mistakes about it. You will find yourself falling, if you have old habits of just of either machine gunning it out there or whatever else, or merging together multiple ideas into one big paragraph. um, uh, you can improve, but it's going to be a struggle. But keep that in mind, and it's things that can help, and that's kind of the point of this whole conversation. How do you tell if it's a good paragraph? Well, can I tell what it is by reading the first sentence, and does the last sentence make sense? And then does the stuff in between reinforce the first sentence and tie in nicely to the last sentence? And so that's pretty much it. Did you analyze the evidence? Does it support the claims? Does it fit into the larger discussion in a good way? And is there any kind of gaps or whatever that are missing? An example of what not to do: don't plagiarize. And that's what this is basically going to say. Don't copy a paragraph from a source or multiple paragraphs. Worse yet, go through and do words, synonym replacement, right click, synonym, find something that seems to mean something similar, not cite the original source. And the reason that that's a bad idea is because plagiarism is not just the words that someone uses. It is the ideas, the concepts, the phrases, the expressions that they're sharing, their thought processes, and the argument they're presenting. That is their work and what you should give them credit for. It's not just the particular words they use. So here's an example of what not to do, taken from Wikipedia, not a scholarly source, by the way, so don't cite it, but I'm using it for emphasis here. Defining what plagiarism is, and then basically changing enough of the words that it might get through a plagiarism detection tool. But if anybody actually bothers to read it, they're going to be like, what is this? What are they talking about? And then the next thought is going to be, where'd they get this from? So don't do it. Reasons to not do it: first of all, the reader's going to notice. It's clunky when people do this, and you can't help but notice it if you actually read your students' papers. It's theft and academic dishonesty. You're taking somebody else's ideas and presenting them as your own. It's going to result in negative things, possible failure of the course or worse. So don't do it. Some paragraph resources: Duke's Writing Studios, pretty good stuff, as well as the meal plan. Again, the library, or the page that I shared at the beginning, pretty good stuff here as well. Some tips and hints: use a reference management tool of some sort. Generally speaking, don't do it by hand. Worst case, use Word's references feature, but it's not very good. Better yet, use something like EndNote or Zotero. Um, there are also tools that allow you to do writing online in a web sort of environment. I've seen those in that. I'll point at it here in a moment, inside of the references page. But the gist of it is, most of the time, you don't want to do it the hard way. You want to use a tool to help you. In particular, these tools typically have integration inside of the process of writing, and they will make sure that you get the formatting reasonably close to being right. Also, there's a rule that says that if you have a reference, it needs to be cited, and if you have a citation, obviously you need a reference. So those two things need to link together. The tools will make sure that's being done. You want to use a Word template, just as I mentioned early on. The reason being, it takes care of a lot of the clunkiness that you have to figure out to do. And from back in the example that I talked about before, it's basically creating heading level ones for the major elements, making sure I get the title casing right. Don't have an introduction, heading level one, and then having a title. Use available resources that you've got available, such as the Rasmussen APA page. Good stuff. It's pretty well done. It's a reasonable template. Some are better than others around, but you definitely want to be using it. The bottom of this page, if you scroll down, whenever you're looking at this later on, you'll see the academic writer, I think it's what it's called. It's an APA resource that's available to you that potentially makes it easier depending upon how you like to do your writing. Here's some example of research. I went to Google Scholar, searched for those keywords that I was looking for. I found a source that was interesting. I click on the double quotes on the thing, and then the EndNote at the bottom of that thing that pops up, and that'll download a file that I can then import into a resource management tool, EndNote or Zotero. Whenever you've got that article in hand, there's a pattern you typically follow to do your evaluation of it. Generally speaking, you review the abstract, you take a look at the findings, conclusions. You're probably also taking a look at the introduction and the conclusions as well. Uh, then you determine if it's a viable source and only cite the things that are new to this article. So if this article references other articles, don't cite the stuff that came out of those other articles. Only cite what was the finding and conclusions of a given article. Otherwise, you're citing something that's coming out of their literature review. That's not a good thing. What you would do instead is open up those original sources that they're citing, read them for yourself, and then decide if you want to cite them or not. That's the appropriate way. Don't cite somebody that's a secondary source. It's not a good thing to do. Instead, cite the original author of the work. Otherwise, you're misattributing the work to someone else. Here's an example of an article to review. The abstract includes the thesis sentence and it or statement, and it actually makes it real clear. This paper, something that starts with that, lets the reader know, hey, look right here. This paper is whenever we say what we're writing about. It's essentially going to be the thesis statement or the research question or topic. And it's very clear in this particular case of the things that it is addressing. So this is a reasonably well-written article. You'll also want to jump down to the conclusion, and you'll see that it restates the thesis statement and also highlights any major takeaways for the reader. Example of a paragraph created from that same source. Not the most riveting thing you'll see, but I do start off with a claim that I'm actually citing on the very first sentence because I'm jumping straight into the fact that that particular set of authors tried to address this framework problem or whatever it is. And then I continue the discussion and then prepare the reader for the next by talking about some gaps or whatever that might be needed to be talked about. Generally speaking, avoid quotations. Only quote if you can't say it better or it's a very compelling quotation. And if you do a quotation, there's a certain way to do it, so make sure you research that. If you use acronyms in the paper, make sure that you define them before you use them. Don't include just IT without saying that that's information technology, for example. There's some rules around it. APA itself says if it's in the dictionary, then you're okay to use it. I find that it's better to err on the side of being overly explicit because there's lots of different collision of acronyms in this field with lots of other fields. And it seems like, to me, it's getting worse. After you've done all of the research, then you're going to shift up and write the introduction. This is not the best introduction you'll ever read, but it's sufficient. It basically states the point of the paper, and it talks about the subpoints. That's exactly what the introduction should do, and ideally it gives the reader a indication of the outline of the paper that they're going to be reading. The conclusion mirrors the introduction by saying, hey, here's what I said was the thesis statement. I restate it. And then I say, here's how I addressed those issues by talking about the subpoints along the way, the subtopics. And then if there's any kind of takeaways, what you want them to know, you put that at the very end as well. So something, if somebody were to ask them, what did you learn from that paper? What is the key thing that's important about it? That's what would be included there. And with that, we've reached the end of this conversation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, do let me know. That's what I'm here for. Stay safe, and we'll speak again soon.